Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I am filming for you the Tropes Book Tag. So this was created by Jadeyraereads books and I was tagged by the lovely Jadeyraereads, so I'll link both their videos in the description so you can go and check them out. It's a really fun tag. It was really difficult. So the idea is that all of the questions are based around popular tropes in fiction. Without further ado, let's get started on the questions. So question 1 is, hopelessly devoted, name 2 characters from separate series that you ship. So this was actually, I think, the most difficult of all the questions. It took me a lot of thinking, but I'm quite happy with the answer I came up with. So I've gone for Lydia from the Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet. This is the sequel to The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet, which is a novelisation of the YouTube series The Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. So this is Lydia, who is Lizzie Bennet's younger sister, but she's made into much more of her own character in both the YouTube series and in the books. And I have paired her with Tobias from the Divergent series. The reason I've gone for these two is because they both have experienced a lot of suffering in different ways. Both have experienced hardship and pain, and both have bounced back from that. And I think they would really complement each other. They would help each other get over the things that have happened to each other, to themselves, and would make each other stronger. So Lydia, despite everything that she goes through in the series, she's so resilient and she still maintains her positivity somehow and really becomes a stronger person despite the adversity she's seen. And Tobias equally has had to cope with a lot in his short life, and I think they just both really need someone who will make them laugh. And well, I think Tobias particularly needs someone who'll make him laugh, and I think Lydia would really do that, and I think they would really complement each other. And now that I think about it, I'm really sad that these two characters will not end up together. So that's my answer for question 1. Question 2, damsel in distress, name a female MC who didn't need a man to complete her. So I wasn't quite sure if this question was meaning think of a book that had like a love interest that was unnecessary, and there were a couple I had in mind for that, but actually I thought there's one character that I read in a book that I read this year that was just so awesome on her own, that she stood up for herself and stood up to all the men in her life. But this is Sometimes a River Song, and the character is called Ayana Weir, and so she lives in a riverboat community. Her father is abusive and mistreats her and her siblings. She's prevented from going to school and learning to read, and is expected just to help out on the ship, and then her father tries to not even marry her off to someone, just sort of gives her to this bloke that is joined the community, and she's not happy about it. So she secretly starts learning to read. Initially she gets her sister to teach her, and then another lady from the riverboat community, and starts to make her own plans of how she's going to escape this. And there is a love interest in this. I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to give any spoilers, but despite what happens with that, she didn't need the help of the guy that she loves to complete her or to help her escape. They talked about planning their escape together, but in the end she doesn't need his help. She just gets on and does it for herself, and she's awesome. And this is a really, really good book, so I recommend it. And Michael B is signed. This came in a Ninja Book box. Question 3, love at first sight, name your OTP. There was only one choice for this. I've just finished rereading this. It's one of my favourite books of all time. It is Emma by Jane Austen, and Emma Woodhouse and Mr. George Knightley just... there are no words. They are just the ultimate OTP. This was my first time rereading it for a really long time, so I've seen adaptations galore, but I read it a really long time ago, so it was so good to reread it and reread it knowing what happens as well. I picked up so much more, I think, than the first time I read it, just from knowing what is going to happen to the different characters. So like the whole thing with Frank Churchill just was like, oh, I could see all the signs because I know the story, and just love this book so much. And Mr. Knightley is just the perfect gentleman. He's just such a dreamboat. Yeah, and they're so well matched, and there's just this line that makes me melt every time where he says to her, here we go, If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more. I'm gonna go all mushy, so I'm gonna put the book down, but yes, if you haven't read any Jane Austen, what are you doing? Check this book out, it's so beautiful, and if you're intimidated by classics, then maybe watch Emma Approved on YouTube first, and that will give you sort of the basics of the storyline so that then you understand what's going on in there. Right, question 4 is mental illness as a quirk. Name a book that represented mental health well. Yeah, this is a big one, and Jess in her video rightly calls out that mental health is often treated as, oh, that's, you know, a fun, interesting quirk that character has, and is not always taken very seriously in literature. And so it's really encouraging to start to see books that actually are handling this topic well. So she mentions Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, which I read this year, and it is a really good representation of anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, so I wanted to give honourable mention to that. The book I'm actually going to pick is one I have been talking about a lot on my channel because I think it deserves to have a bit more recognition. It was a Ninja Book Club pick a couple of months ago. It is Killing Hapless Ally by Anna Vaught. This is based on Anna Vaught's own experiences of various mental illnesses. I can't remember exactly how they're defined. She does go into what they are, but basically she has a really troubled childhood with indifferent parents, and then she's haunted essentially by the ghost of her mother, kind of, well, like in her head. To help herself cope with what she's been through, she creates a separate version of herself called Hapless Ally, so that when things go wrong she can say, oh, that's Hapless Ally. But this alternative persona starts to develop its own self essentially, and so she feels like she's two different people. She also has sort of imaginary friends, but they're all different celebrities that she talks to help her cope with her life and her story of her recovery. The doctors that helped her, the friends and family that helped her. It's not an easy read. In some places it's a bit too stream of consciousness and it's difficult to follow, and it does tend to jump about her storyline a little bit, but I found it a really fascinating insight into one person's struggle with mental illness, and it just really makes you appreciate what people go through, and not everyone will have as extreme a situation as in this book, but actually you never know what's going on underneath the surface in people's lives. What I also love about this book, which one of the reasons I keep talking about it is because I think every book should do this, it actually has listed at the beginning, if I can find it, it has a trigger warning of the sorts of things that are going to come up in the book, so that you know you can go in prepared, or if you know that that's going to be upsetting to you, you can avoid it. So I think every book should have just a little paragraph before the book starts to say this book contains these things and be warned. Anyway, so that's Killing Hapless Ally by Anna Vaught. Question 5 is The Chosen One. Name a main character that did or almost did ruin a series for you. This one was quite a hard one, it took me a little while to think of, but the book I'm going for, or the character I'm going for, is, well, the book is The Gospel of Loki by Joanne Harris, and the main character in that is Loki. My main problem with this was that it was not the Loki from the Marvel universe. So I love Marvel films, particularly the Thor ones are some of my favourites, particularly Thor Ragnarok was brilliant, and Loki is one of my favourite characters in the Marvel universe. So I went into reading The Gospel of Loki expecting it to be those characters, but I think it's based more on the Norse mythology, which I don't know very much about. But what I didn't like was, it's not that I didn't like the character, because it is essentially the same character, it's just a slightly more, I guess, more extreme version. Some of the other characters, like Thor, is not represented very well in this novel, but what I didn't like was the narration. So Loki narrates the story, he's an omniscient narrator as well, so he's telling the story after it's happened and would keep saying things like, oh, but you'll find out about that later, or I'll tell you more about that another time. So sort of dropping hints at what was going to come in the story, and like I really struggled with the narrative voice in this book. So it's the first book in, I think it's a duology, I don't know if there are going to be more, and I still haven't decided if I want to read the second one or not. The first one ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and so part of me is like, well, I do want to find out what happens, but I don't know if I can endure another 300-400 pages of that narrative voice that's so frustrating and annoying and meh. So I might just stick to Marvel Loki in the future. And I borrowed that book from the library, so I don't have a copy, but I'm glad I did, because I would have regretted buying it after I read it, I think. Question 6, friends to lovers. Name a duo that went from friendship goals to relationship goals. So the book I picked for this is another one I borrowed from the library, but is one that I probably will buy for myself because I really enjoyed it and want to reread it. It's called Who is Tom Ditto by Danny Wallace. And so I don't want to give away so the main character is Tom in this book. I don't want to give away who he ends up with, but I think what I liked about it, so the basic premise is, I'm not explaining this very well, I'll start again. The basic premise is Tom's girlfriend leaves him a note one day, they live together, and she disappears and she leaves him a note that says, I haven't left, but I have. So she's just sort of disappeared, he doesn't know where she's gone or anything, and in trying to track down what's happened to her, he discovers that she was part of this group called Carbon Copy, and what they essentially do is they find a random person in the street, and they decide to follow them and copy them. So for example, they might follow them into a restaurant and it'll order exactly the same things from the menu, and it's a way of trying new things and experiencing life and trying to sort of find themselves by copying other people. So through this group, Tom makes some new friends. He makes a friend called Pia who really helps him get over his ex who's disappeared. He also develops a friendship with one of his co-workers, so he works for a radio station, and so he reads the news, and there's a new breakfast show host called Cass, and he develops a really good friendship with her, and it's not at all a love triangle. And this is what I liked about it, was that the relationship was just sort of almost an afterthought. In the epilogue, he enters into a relationship with one of these women. I'm not going to go into it because I feel like I've given too much away already, but just in the epilogue, it just as a throwaway comment mentions that he ends up with someone, and I was just like, actually that's really cool, but that wasn't the focus of the story. The focus is actually on the other one and the friendship with her. So hopefully that's not spoiled the story. It's a really good book, it's really fun. Danny Wallace has such an interesting take. So I'd read some of his non-fiction. So if you've seen the film Yes Man starring Jim Carrey, that was based on a book by Danny Wallace of the same name, but it was not fiction. He actually did spend a year saying yes to every opportunity that presented itself to him, and then he wrote it into a novel, and then they made it into a film starring Jim Carrey, which was really cool. And Danny Wallace actually has a cameo, and everyone thought it was weird when I squealed when he came on screen, because no one knew that he was the author of the book that the film was based on. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. What was I saying? So yeah, Danny Wallace has a really interesting way of writing, and his characters are fascinating, and I'm really glad that he's writing more fiction. So, and he's really funny as well. So yeah, definitely worth checking that book out. Question 7. Amnesia. Name a book you would forget for one reason or another. So the book I've picked for this is called Longbourn. I can't remember who wrote it. So I don't have this book anymore because I didn't enjoy it enough to keep it. It is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of the servants in the house. While I did enjoy aspects of it, I just didn't like the way it presented some of the characters, particularly Mr. Bennet, who understandably from Pride and Prejudice is not necessarily the most sensible person, because he made a very foolish choice in who he married, but I didn't like certain aspects of the story of how different characters were presented, and part of me wishes I hadn't read it to have Pride and Prejudice tainted by it, but actually I've reread Pride and Prejudice since then, and it hasn't actually taken anything away from my enjoyment of that. It was about 2 years ago I read Longbourn, and it's faded enough from my memory that it hasn't upset me too much. The story itself was quite interesting, particularly one of the characters, I think, who was involved in the Napoleonic Wars, and that was an interesting story. So I think maybe I would have preferred it if it hadn't been sold as a Pride and Prejudice retelling, if it was just a story of servants in a gentleman's home and their history, but without trying to tie it into Pride and Prejudice. I don't know. Anyway, so that's that one. Oh, the light's gone really weird in here. It's gonna mess this up. that better or worse? That's better. The light is... Sorry for the weird lighting today. It's got really dark really quickly today. It's only just gone 4 and it's just been a really stormy day, so I tried to find the most light room to film in, which was the book room, but actually the light is just really gone. So I've got the hallway light on, which is why my face is now looking weird because it was getting too dark in here. Back to the tag. Question 8. Bad boys, name your favourite villain. Again, this was actually quite an easy one because I'm going back to my favourite book of all time, which you've heard me talk about loads, which is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Mrs. Danvers in here is just so brilliantly written. She is the ultimate crazy old lady. She's the housekeeper. If you're not familiar with the story, it's about a young woman who marries a wealthy gentleman, and his first wife died under mysterious circumstances, and when she goes back to his house, she struggles with, not the ghost in sense of like it's not a ghost story, but sort of the remembrance of Rebecca, the first wife, that lingers on in the house, and the central to that is Mrs. Danvers, who is constantly trying to undermine the new Mrs. De Winter in everything, and she's just very creepy. And particularly if you see adaptations of it, she's always like in this black dress, and she's very stern looking with her hair in a tight bun, and yeah, so Mrs. Danvers, brilliant villain, excellent book, favourite book of all time. If you haven't read it, you should check it out because it's awesome. And 9. Missing parents or adults, name a book that could have benefited from a bit of parental guidance or adult supervision. So for this book I have gone for, I don't know if this was kind of meant to be aimed at YA books, which often contain orphans, but the book I've actually gone for is called The Heart's Invisible Furies by Boyne. I filmed a full review of this book, which I'll link below. So the main character, Cyril, is given up for adoption by his mother because it's Ireland in the 40s and she's unmarried, and so she is not able to look after him herself. So he's adopted by a couple called the Avrils, who neither of them are actually very interested in him as a child, and I think a lot of the problems he encounters would have helped if he'd been able to talk to either one of his adoptive parents, or actually if he'd had a relationship with his biological mother. He could have avoided a lot of the bad situations he finds himself in. Also though, I felt, because his mother is a character that features through that novel, eventually they're reunited and realise the connection between them, but she was such a brilliant character that I wanted her to feature more in the story, and I wanted to know more about what happened to her when she's not in Cyril's life, but because the story's told from Cyril's perspective, we don't get that. And the way the book was structured, it was set, each section of the book was 7 years after the previous section, so there were huge gaps in the story because it was trying to cover all of Cyril's life. So it's a very good book. I did really enjoy it, but yeah, Cyril would have done better in his life if he'd had more supportive parentage, and I feel like his mother could have been a much bigger part of the storyline even without him knowing who she was. So that's my answer for that one. And finally, question 10, girl/guy gang, tag some friends. So I'm going to go again for tagging a couple of my recent subscribers. Hi, thanks for watching. So that is What Is a Farida and Tome Infinity. So I'd love to see your take on this tag. I'm also going to tag, just because I really want to see their view on this, so I'm going to tag the book Goblin, because I'd love to see a goblin's take on some of these popular tropes. So you guys are tagged. If you want to make this video and you haven't been tagged to do it, you can say I tagged you, and please let me see your videos. Yeah, and that's it. So this was a really fun tag to make, so thanks loads Jadeyrae for tagging me, and thanks to Jess for creating it, because it's been really fun. And that's all I have for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!